Despite the fact that it's been quite a while since chapters 3 and 4 came out, there are still plenty of burning questions that have yet to be answered. One of my favorite things about chapters 3 and 4 was just that. What seemed like it was going to be a very standard continuation of what came before was drastically different than what we expected. And rather than answering all the questions we pretty much had the answers to, the game seemed to jump 5 steps forward, making death an extremely important topic, revealing that Chris and Carol and the Knight were all working together in the shelter, and bringing to light dozens of even bigger, even more cryptic mysteries. What's up with the fallen star making rivers with its tears? What is up with Roots and Image Friend? And a question that I'm surprised more people aren't talking about, why did Gerson have a shadow crystal? See, this question is a lot more important than you might think. Gerson doesn't just own a shadow crystal, he says that someone wanted him to use it. So then, this begs the all-important question of this video, who gave Gerson his shadow crystal? My name is Spookydood, make sure to like and subscribe, now let's discuss. Is what I'd say if this was a normal video, but to be honest with you, this is more of a speculative video. We are sort of running out of Deltarune theories to make, I feel like. I mean, there's a lot of interesting ones. I say this just after Toilet Theory came out, which looks awesome, by the way, you should go watch it. But I am myself thinking about these topics, about these mysteries. I'm running out of formal, A to B theories on Deltarune, so something like this is actually not straightforward, and I don't have a definitive answer. I'll tell you who I think did it. I'll tell you who I think gave Gerson the Shadow Crystal, but this is more of a speculative video, so just as a warning, this is sort of, in my opinion, a discussion, right? An open-ended kind of discussion-y, theory thingy that maybe you'll enjoy listening to. Anyway, just warning you so that you don't say, wait a minute, this wasn't a hardcore theory, you're not convincing me of anything, you're expecting me to leave a comment? Yes, I am. To start off, we have to address the idea that someone actually gave him the Shadow Crystal. As much as this might seem silly considering what I just spoke about, Gerson never actually says that anyone gave him the Shadow Crystal. Specifically, he says, and take this, too. For some reason, I found this weird piece of glass in my desk. Felt like someone really wanted me to use this thing. But it didn't interest me, so you can take it. So, while he definitely thinks that someone wanted him to use it, implying a sort of transactional relationship with that person, as in they probably gave him the Shadow Crystal, there is no confirmation. It simply appeared in his desk. So then, let's talk about our first suspect. Nobody. Is it possible that nobody gave Gerson the Shadow Crystal? That it simply appeared in his desk without any explanation? Well, what happened with the rest of the Shadow Crystals? In chapters 1, 2, and 4, there is a strong secret boss who holds a Shadow Crystal. We've all assumed that the Shadow Crystals were given to them by someone. Cough, cough, Gaster. However, looking back at the dialogue, the crystals were never really mentioned directly. Jevil went insane after a strange individual met with them and was locked away. Could that individual have given Jevil the Shadow Crystal? Possibly, but Spamton also had a Shadow Crystal, and Shom confirms that he found it inside the Neo body in the basement. After collecting a second Shadow Crystal and speaking with Shom, they say, I wonder if perhaps long ago that old machine was very important to somebody. A certain Lightener, perhaps. Or maybe it's just a hunch. Swatch confirms this by saying that the robot was the embodiment of a Lightener's dream, and that the Lightener filled it with their hope, giving it an incredible power. In this way, perhaps the Shadow Crystals are formed through pure hope. Or maybe hope isn't the right word. We've seen from the Chapter 5 teasers that Toby has posted, we'll be speaking with Shom about the Shadow Crystals. They say, Chris, I suppose I owe you an explanation about all of this. No, you no doubt have realized yourself by now. The Shadow Crystals are far more than mere pieces of glass. In actuality, they contain a certain power. You could call this power will. No, perhaps will isn't right. The power they contain is... ... and we don't know what they say next. Come on! Now, say what you will, but I think we both know what they are going to say. Determination, obviously. What other word? It would be really funny if it's not now. But anyway, that is essentially the power that Shom is discussing, and I think it's possible that the Shadow Crystals haven't been given to the secret bosses at all, but were instead formed by determination from Lighteners, and ended up with the secret bosses in one way or another. In Chapter 2, the Shadow Crystal was inside the robot. That Shadow Crystal formed from Metaton's determination. Same with Chapter 4. Gerson's Shadow Crystal that he randomly found in his desk might have been formed from Alvin's determination. Perhaps Alvin, torn with grief over the passing of his father and his inability to live up to his greatness, somehow created that Shadow Crystal. This sort of fits in with Gerson's story. With Gerson, who knows a lot more than he lets on, recognizing that the Shadow Crystal isn't his to use, if it truly does contain the power of determination and the ability to change the future, Gerson isn't the one who needs to write that future. It's the youth, it's Susie, and it's Alvin. which is why Gerson writes that letter to Alvin, or Susie does. Perhaps to take one step further, the shadow crystals are made of tears. Yes, tears as in the ones that come out of your eyes when you're sad. Alvin was definitely sorrowful over Gerson's death, and kept Gerson's ashes by his desk. It makes sense to consider the idea that Alvin may have cried into the desk, leading to the shadow crystal's formation. We can also consider Mettaton's robot design, a design that is obviously very important to him that may have caused him to shed a tear over. Perhaps this is why Ram didn't turn into a secret boss despite carrying all the basic characteristics of one. No one would shed a tear for him. This could explain Chapter 4's mysterious book saying, "So wept the fallen star, making rivers with its tears. Within the bitter waters something grew. It looked like glass. The tears became the glass." Before we go too far with this idea, though, I just want to say that I think this is false. I really want to say that this isn't false. As a matter of fact, as I'm reading this, I paused the recording so that I could read through the evidence one more time and make sure I can't say that this is actually true. But unfortunately, as much as I want to believe this because it's such a nice, neat, clean explanation, I don't think we can. I don't think the shadow crystals were just formed out of nowhere. While I actually do think it's possible that they're made of tears, and I'm actually, again, really fond of the idea the more I think about it, I don't think they are formed out of nowhere. As a matter of fact, I think it's factually provable that they were specifically given to the secret bosses. First off, what's up with Jevil and the Knight? While the Knight is still sort of a gray area that we can't really talk about just yet, I think that if the shadow crystals formed naturally from determination in the light world or whatever, there's no explanation as to how Jevil got his. Like, flat out none outside of just fan fiction and speculation. And there's more. The shadow crystals only belong to strong individuals, and I believe this is proof that they were specifically given to them. First, when Shawm talks about Jevil, they say that Jevil was the only one who could match them in the games they used to play. While I understand this isn't Shawm saying, "Oh, that dude needed to be nerfed," I think that the further mention of Jevil being a strong adversary confirms that he was always very powerful, even before he got the shadow crystal. Shawm tells us they have a feeling that we'll find more crystals if we continue to defeat strong adversaries like him. Meaning, Jevil was strong before he got the crystal. Spamton, yes, found the crystal, but it was only after his last phone call with someone, the call that ends with garbage noise on the other line. Spamton was guided to the robot, and found the crystal there. Even if it wasn't necessarily placed there manually, someone seemingly knew it was in the robot. We also know this to be true about Gerson. Gerson, without the crystal against the Titan, was even more powerful than when we fought him one-on-one, presumably because he was holding back against Susie. But still, confirmation that the crystal doesn't provide great power to these individuals. It just so happens to belong only to very strong individuals. I think this is proof, unless you believe it's all a big coincidence, that the shadow crystals were specifically given to strong individuals. As in, they were picked out and given the crystals because they were strong. The crystals didn't make them strong. And I know that you probably will argue about Spamton, because on his own he's not that strong, but I'd personally argue that the machine itself is strong, and so when Spamton powers up with the Neo body, so there's still something there, right? Spamton was guided to the machine by the voice on the phone, so it's like, okay, it still works. Now, there is one more difficult topic to discuss. Chapter 3. Why did the Knight have the Shadow Crystal? Many believe that the Knight was actually late to the party in Chapter 3. They were meant to show up much earlier, give the secret boss the Shadow Crystal, and kidnap Toriel. However, as we see with Tenna asking how they aren't here yet, the Knight was late, only showed up at the last minute, battled with the heroes instead of taking Toriel, and ended up dropping the Shadow Crystal that was possibly meant to go to Ram. Believe it or not, there's actually a good amount of evidence for this theory. First off, the name of the chapter is Late Night, and after completing the chapter it switches from Tenna's smile to the Knight's visor, possibly implying that the title is a play on words, and that it doesn't just mean late night like late night television, but also late night, like the KNIGHT was late. Furthermore, Ram has lots of the qualities of the secret bosses. A shunned antisocial weirdo who has a unique design, is the only of their kind, has some knowledge or claims to have some knowledge about the true nature of freedom. They are a plug that Chris played with like a toy, they have an NPC explain their backstory and downfall after death, and they're the ones to lead Chris to the mantle minigame. By all means, Ram makes sense as a secret boss. Not only that, but they turn to stone later in the night. It seems like, at least to me, the Chapter 3 fountain went wrong. It begins to snow, go empty, Darkeners turn to stone, including Ram, and the doorway to the right lets a great blizzard of snow into the Dark World. Therefore, it's theoretically possible that the original plan was for the Knight to arrive, show up, provide Ram the Shadow Crystal, and then steal Toriel and leave. However, this is just a theory right now, and I personally have issues with it. The biggest one being Ram isn't a secret boss. There is no sign of Ram having any amount of strength greater than the other Darkeners. There's no indication that Ram is going to power up at some point like Spamton or anything like that. Furthermore, Sham wasn't surprised at us battling the Knight, and this is, in my opinion, the big one. They said that we'd need the Shadow Mantle for our next opponent, and obtaining the mantle is done after Ram turns to stone. The mantle is used against the Knight. Sham knows you fought the Knight and is shocked when you reveal you beat them, even without the Shadow Mantle, meaning they were expecting the Shadow Mantle to be used in this very encounter the whole time. The Knight wasn't late. I believe that taking Undyne was likely always the plan. This is why Chris opened the door, not just for the Knight to show up, but for Undyne to show up. Everything has been carefully planned out by Chris and Carol. So then, if the Knight wasn't late, that means that it was meant to have the Shadow Crystal in Chapter 3's ending. That means that whatever these crystals are, we can apply them to the Knight. So what is the point of the Shadow Crystals? This is obviously a silly question to ask considering how confusing they are right now, but it seems clear it has to do with what Sham has been telling us about. They can possibly change the future. They contain the power of determination or will. Us collecting them is beginning to give Sham hope for the future. So, whoever provided Gerson the Shadow Crystal and wanted him to use it had to have known about this, had to have known that the crystals can be used in some way. Let's work our way through this admittedly short list. Starting off with the Knight. This seems to be a pretty simple and effective answer. The Knight is going around giving people Shadow Crystals. They gave one to Jevil, they guided Spamton to the machine, or alternatively placed the crystal inside the machine, they showed up in Chapter 3 holding one, and they gave one to Gerson. Technically, this could make sense. It doesn't even have to just be the Knight, it could be Chris, Carol, and the Knight together. Perhaps some part of my earlier theory was right. The Shadow Crystals are brought to the Dark World through the placement of a specific object in the Light World, and Chris or Carol knowingly planted some in places that the Darkeners could find. Spamton knows something about the Knight. The Knight flew around the Chapter 4 Dark World, giving them enough time to swoop by and drop one in Gerson's desk, and so I don't think it's impossible. The biggest problems here are with the logistics, and the fact that the Shadow Crystals don't seem to be a part of the Knight's plan. Whether you get them or not, the plan goes on. The Shadow Crystals also seem to be a sort of Chris side goal, with Eram asking Chris why they want to collect them, noting that it's probably because they enjoy playing around like this. Is it possible that Chris is searching for them to alter a future in which the Dark Worlds go away forever, or something like that? I don't know. Forgetting about the speculation, there's also the issue that Sham talks about the Knight and the strange individual separately. They are not the same person. So I don't know if the Knight is the one giving out the Shadow Crystals, especially if the Knight wants Chris to collect them. It makes no sense to withhold the crystals from Chris if the crystals are part of the Knight's plan, and it equally makes no sense to hand the crystals out at all, especially not to Darkeners we're going to meet up with, if the crystals aren't part of the Knight's plan. From this point forwards, though, we're going to have to contend with a big problem. If the Knight is not giving out the Shadow Crystals, this means that someone else is, and that either someone actually gave the crystal to the Knight, which raises like a billion questions, or alternatively, the Knight having the crystal isn't necessarily because of someone handing it to them, but instead because it was formed somehow. Boy, this is difficult. Here's the thing, right? There's the book in Chapter 4 that talks about the fallen star that wept and made rivers with its tears, and then from the rivers, something like glass started to form. And it gives the impression that perhaps the Shadow Crystals aren't necessarily a collectible item. Like, there's not specifically 5 Shadow Crystals that, one guy owns, and he was like, all right, I'm going to hand out my 5 Shadow Crystals to people. These are the 5 Shadow... It's not the Infinity Stones, okay? I hate these comparison because people are going to say, Normie movie, you stupid idiot. But they're not the Infinity Stones, right? The idea that we're sort of getting from how there's, like, the Knight is you took a Shadow Crystal just from hitting it hard enough, and it's like, well, was that the one Shadow Crystal it was holding? Or is this entire armor made of Shadow Crystals, right? This is the problem. Are the Shadow Crystals sort of a natural resource that form on their own? Or are they, like the Infinity Stones, specific and collectible? And I don't know. This is one of the big questions I have, and one of the difficulties. Any character we get to, because we're going to touch on Gaster and Eram and Sham and Image Friend, any character we get to, the question of how exactly they got the Shadow Crystal to someone like the Knight, it doesn't really make sense, and it's very difficult to know, unless there's some explanation like, oh yeah, the Shadow Crystals are formed naturally from determination, and they appear in the Dark Worlds, or something like that. You know what I mean? And the other problem is that Sham has knowledge of every boss we're going to fight that has a Shadow Crystal. And so Right now, I'm personally leaning on the side of, like, vibes and feelings from this last chapter. I want to say that the shadow crystals are some kind of natural resource, because that seems like what the game is leaning towards. However, based on my knowledge of this game and the lore and, like, what we actually have, the fact that Sham tells us the 5 specific people we're going to fight that have a shadow crystal implies that there are, in fact, like the Infinity Stones, a solid number of them. There are only 5, and therefore they're like, they weren't naturally formed. They are some kind of handed out item to these characters. You know what I'm saying? And so the next character on that list is Mr. Obvious, W.D. Gaster. I think this is arguably the most agreed upon shadow crystal giver across the fanbase at this point. Shaw mentions that Jevel's attitude changed after he met a strange someone who made his world outlook darker yet darker. Boy, I wonder who that is. Spamton talks with someone on the phone that leads to garbage noise on the other end before finding the robot and the crystal. I think there's a high chance that the one handing out the crystals is none other than Gaster himself. Now, technically there isn't any new evidence to support this, just what we already had from Chapter 1. Though I'd argue that the menu now having slots showing how many crystals you have could be argued to be evidence, as Gaster is seemingly the one who put the menu system together. That being said, if Gaster really needed you to get the crystals, I think he'd say something to you about them, right? Then again, we're not sure about his take on the weird route, and he hasn't commented on that at all. Technically, there's a world in which Gaster has been handing out shadow crystals, and wanted Gerson to use one, but that just seems very odd. Again, I think it really comes down to what the shadow crystals are actually usable for in order for us to tell. Another candidate is ERAM, or alternatively, Image Friend. This falls into the same problems that Gaster does, lack of solid evidence. Image Friend is entirely unknown at this point, and while I think that yes, I can see the reveal being that Image Friend has been handing out the shadow crystals with the hopes of the secret bosses utilizing their power, this again is entirely fanfiction given how little we know about Friend and the crystals. As far as ERAM goes, there is a little bit more ground here. ERAM says that he has work to do, as does Chris, before flying away, and allowing Chris to access the Shadow Mantle. ERAM is the only entity other than Sham who knows about the Shadow Crystals, as well as the fact that Chris wants to collect them. Javel and Spamton seem to have no idea about the crystals or what they are, and Gerson doesn't care. ERAM is the only entity besides Sham who not only understands them, knows about them, has an idea about their apparent use case, but also sees them as a collective entity. Knowing that Chris is collecting them means that ERAM has knowledge of past and or future Dark Worlds, meaning that while you may not want to admit it, ERAM, a character who I think is much more important than we realize, not only is likely to return in the future, perhaps in a non-video game form, but is also a very possible candidate for being the one handing out the Shadow Crystals. Again, we might run into the problem of, well, why wouldn't they just give Chris the crystals if they want Chris to have them? But they fight Chris specifically to get that look in their eyes, right? To make them fight, to try and draw out that whatever tendencies they think Chris has. And so giving them to extremely strong bosses actually makes a ton of sense, because all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, they're doing that same thing with the crystals. They're giving them to bosses who are extremely difficult so that Chris has to fight them. Moving forwards, I have an even crazier suggestion. A suggestion you guys might not like. What if it's Sham? Sham knows about the crystals, about when and who we'll specifically have to fight to go get them, and was in contact with Jevel prior to his being locked up. Furthermore, what if Sham and ERAM are one and the same? They have similar speaking patterns if you really look into it, they have a slightly similar look, and Sham being on Azrael's computer could imply that there was some way into the Chapter 3 Dark World for Sham, through a sort of proxy. They also have 4 letters in their name, with 3 of them being EAM. Also, look at Sham's nose. Looks awfully similar to the icon for the shadow crystals on the main menu, doesn't it? And that's seemingly where this trail goes cold. Again, we don't know what the shadow crystals can be used for, and we don't truly know about a lot of the potential suspects. Gaster, Friend, ERAM, and the Knight are all very much mysteries at the moment, specifically in terms of their characterization. So this is kind of where I end. I don't know what to say. There isn't really much evidence on any given character. I think that the most likely candidates at this moment are ERAM and Gaster. I know that the Knight seems like a very likely candidate because of the whole, oh, they show up late and they got the crystal and they were flying around Chapter 4 and, you know, they probably gave Gerson the crystal. But the fact is, why wouldn't the Knight just give Chris the crystals, right? If the Knight is the Knight trying to hide the crystals from Chris, then why not just hold all the crystals, right? It doesn't really make sense. Image Friend is very possible, but Image Friend might also be the greatest baker in the freaking Dark World, and he makes cakes, and that's his whole story. We don't know. Maybe he's works at the Dark World DMV. We don't know because he's a mystery, and everybody just like acts like we know. We don't know. Image Friend is sort of characterized as this like evil, dark, destructive, horrible villain that like, is behind everything because of the tail from hell and all that, the tail of hell and the pointed tail. And it's like, yeah, okay, there's definitely something going on with him, but we don't actually know who he is. We don't actually know what he wants. And so the idea that Image Friend is handing out the shadow crystals, it's like, yeah, maybe he's handing out candy cane and sugar plums to little children all over the world. We don't know for a fact because we don't know anything about him. Eram and Sham are sort of like, they're closer because they're actually related to the Shadow Crystal quest. Sham, I don't know how I feel about Sham because prior to Chapter 4, I believe, I would have said, yeah, maybe Sham is the one giving out the Shadow Crystals. Maybe, because a lot of people think there's going to be a secret fight with Sham because they're implied to be extremely powerful and they have the Seam Ripper in that one little, the cross-stitch book. And so, yeah, okay, maybe, but then Sham has that whole dialogue in Chapter 4 about how they're feeling hopeful for the first time, and it's like, oh, wow, okay. And we also know that they're going to talk to Chris about the crystals in Chapter 5 and say, you know, the Shadow Crystals, what you're collecting them for is, and so we also know about the pure crystal, which is the, in the description, the leaked item that is the crystals purified by the cat. And so it's like, okay, maybe Sham is not evil at all. Maybe, I don't even mean evil. Maybe Sham is not the one handing out the shadow crystals at all. Maybe they really do want us to collect them, and it is giving them a little bit of hope for the first time in their life, and they're not the one doing that. So then it's just Eram or Gaster. And Eram, I actually think makes a lot of sense, because, while, again, it's just like Image Friend, we don't know anything about Eram. Eram might be Image Friend, for all we know, but as much as Eram is very much a mystery, they do have that whole dialogue in Chapter 3 about trying to get Chris to feel the blood flowing and become a murderer, which, obviously, I don't think anybody thinks Chris has violent, psychopath tendencies, but I do think that we have established that there is something in Chris's past that they are trying to forget, that they can't wash off their hands, and, I mean, there's the implication that they might have killed somebody. Like, I don't know if I believe that, but it is definitely implied with that one character in Chapter 4's Egram who says, this is where we, don't kill people. And so, for all we know, that could have happened. Like, that could be what's going on. And the reason that Eram is giving the Shadow Crystals to the hardest bosses is because Chris has to fight. But again, that's just a theory. That's just a speculation. We don't know. So then it's just Gaster. And Gaster is relatively problematic because then the question is, how did Gaster get the Shadow Crystal to the Knight? How did Gaster get the Shadow Crystal to Gerson? Why did Gaster give the Shadow Crystals to these people? It doesn't quite make much sense. But again, it could make sense. All we need is a couple lines of dialogue to explain it. So that's my problem, right? I also think it could be kind of a mixture of the two ideas, that the Shadow Crystals are both being handed out and also formed somehow. It could be a cross between those two. They're formed and then handed out, right? I don't know. It's a mystery to me, and I don't have a solid answer. If you asked me who I think is giving out the Shadow Crystals to the characters, truthfully, I would say it's probably Gaster, maybe? I don't know. This is the problem. I mean, now that I've done the video, I was like, in the beginning, I said, I'm going to tell you who I think it is. Here I am, and I'm thinking, man, Eram sounds pretty good right about now, don't they? That sounds like a good theory. So this is where I'm going to leave you, honestly. I really want to know your thoughts. I didn't want to... I wrote this video a couple weeks ago, and I said, okay, this is too speculative. My guys, my fans, the Spookydood army, they won't like this, and I won't record it because I don't want them to end the video and say, oh, that was too speculative for me, Spookydood, and unsubscribe. But I was looking at it this morning, and I thought, man, maybe I should make it, because I'm either going to make it or not make it. And if I don't make it, this video is never going to go out, and these thoughts are never going to go out. And I like conversation. I personally love doing videos like this, where I'm just kind of talking about stuff. If it was up to me, I'd make a billion Deltarune videos where I'm just sort of open-ended talking about a topic, about what I think, and saying like, well, who knows, what do you think? That's what I do. I'm in a Discord server all the time where I'm talking about Deltarune theories with people, and we just kind of argue back and forth on stuff we know there aren't any answers to right now. It's fun. It's fun to do. It's fun to think. And with so many theories that are sort of like either very big or overarching and cover everything, or theories that are fun and crazy, I think, why not just a classic good old what the heck video? You know what I mean? So that's what this was. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you don't feel like I scammed you for not giving you a definitive hardcore theory, but I really want to know what you think, and I do want to read the comments here, because I don't know. I mean, I've looked it up online. Like I did a good old Google search to steal other people's theories and make this. No, I'm kidding. I did a good Google search though to see what other people think, and nobody really has any solid answers. Everybody sort of hovers around the same things that I did. So I'm curious what you guys think. Who do you think is giving Gerson the Shadow Crystal? Or who do you think gave Gerson the Shadow Crystal? Who do you think is handing out the Shadow Crystals? Or do you think that they're not being handed out at all? Please let me know in the comments. I really enjoyed making this video. I know what you're probably thinking, oh man, there's no answer in this one. Lame. But I actually had a really fun time recording and thinking about this one. So my name is Spookydood. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.